Who was Khnum? The oldest and most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon are often the most mysterious and lacking in scholarly information. They are old, so old, that they're veiled in a mist of ancient mysteries that accompanies such great age. From the earliest developments of the Egyptian civilization in the Nile's valleys, going back several thousand years, these chief deities shaped the emerging culture of Egypt. One such god is Khnum, the great potter and creator of people and the chief deity of the source of the Nile. As such, Khnum became one of the most important and revered gods of ancient Egyptians. His worship was directly related to the fertility and abundance that the flooding of the Nile brought. Join us today as we try to uncover the deeper character of Khnum, the divine potter, and attempt to get deeper into the mysteries that follow this enigmatic deity. The age and importance of Khnum. Khnum has the distinction of being one of the earliest known Egyptian deities. His name and invocations mentioning him were discovered in some of the earliest ancient Egyptian monuments and writings. His role was equally important. He was considered the god of the source of the Nile, and as we all know, the Nile was the pulsating heart of the entire ancient Egyptian civilization. To be connected with it, Khnum truly had to have been immensely revered and have ascended to the very top of the pantheon. The annual flooding of the Nile was the biggest life-bringing event for the ancient Egyptians. The flooding brought fertility to the Nile valleys, leaving silt and clay in its wake, and a flourishing of crops and vegetation. As the Egyptians always connected these natural occurrences with life and abundance and fertility, so did they ascribe these events to Khnum. Furthermore, Khnum was envisioned as having the role of a divine potter. The role given to this god was one of creation. He is said to form humans in their child form, on a potter's wheel, from the rich clay of the Nile's flooding. He placed the formed beings in the wombs of mothers and life would spring forth, thanks to his work. The name Khnum, in ancient Egyptian HNMW, comes from the root word meaning to join, to unite, and another root word that has the meaning to build. This makes Khnum's name fairly obvious and consistent with his role as a builder and creator. He was not only the creator of human life in the form of children, but also the creator of the universe, the gods, and mankind, in various different interpretations through the history of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Khnum was believed to have created the first egg of the world, and to have made the bodies of the first gods and men on his potter's wheel from clay. Several historic inscriptions name Khnum as the creator of both aspects of human life in Egyptian belief. These were the body, Khat, and the life force, Ka, which Khnum combined and created on his potter's wheel. Thus he created life. 7 forms of Khnum are mentioned, combined with his role as the creator of the universe. These are Khnum Neb, the Lord. Khnum Keni Per Ankh, governor of the House of Life. Khnum Keni Tawi, governor of the 2 lands. Khnum Nhep, the creator. Khnum Seket Sep F, weaver of his light. Khnum Keni Nechemchem Anket, governor of the House of Sweet Life. Khnum Neb Ta Anktet, lord of the land of life. As a predominantly life-bringing god and a water deity, Khnum was most often portrayed as a ram-headed man, as the ancient Egyptians believed that rams symbolized fertility. Most art portrayals show him seated behind a potter's wheel, or standing with a jar from which he pours water, symbolizing the flooding of the Nile. There are also several examples of Khnum portrayed with 4 rams' heads, as a sort of hybrid amalgamation of the elements of earth, fire, air, water, and also the 4 life forces, Kas, of Osiris, Ra, Shu, and Geb. Shu and Geb were also important, primordial Egyptian deities, and this amalgamation clearly shows how important Khnum was as a creator deity. This four-headed representation is known as Sheft-Hat, the great primeval force. The flooding of the Nile and salvation from Khnum. Khnum is a god that controlled the so-called doors of the Nile, and as such controlled the annual flood at his own wish. But what happens when nature steps in and messes things up for the believers? So it happened that during a period in the Egypt's third dynasty the Nile didn't flood for 7 consecutive years, causing extensive droughts and famine. This happened during the rule of the famed pharaoh Djoser. This famine, an actual historic event, was preserved in a myth and inscribed on an artifact known as the famine stele, located on Seal Island in the Nile, near Aswan. It was carved during the Ptolemaic kingdom. It tells how the pharaoh Djoser, seeking to save the land from the 7 years of famine, implores his high priest Imhotep to discover the birthplace of Hapi, god of the Nile. Imhotep then travels to the so-called House of Nets, at Hermopolis, and discovers that the flooding of the Nile is controlled by Khnum himself. In the myth, it is described in detail how Khnum is the one controlling the great doors that allow the flooding of the Nile. It is stated that Khnum resides on Elephantine Island in the Nile, and that Djoser decides to travel there. Once there, in the temple of Khnum, the joy of life, Djoser is purified, and offers all good things to Khnum. He then falls asleep, and is greeted by a vision of Khnum, who says to him, "I am Khnum, the Creator. My hands rest upon thee to protect thy person, and to make sound thy body. I gave thee thine heart, I am he who created himself. I am the primeval watery abyss, and I am the Nile who riseth at his will to give health for me to those who toil. I am the guide and director of all men, the Almighty, the Father of the gods." In this vision Khnum promises Djoser that the Nile will flood once more, and continue to do so, as long as Djoser rebuilds the ruined temple of Khnum on Elephantine Island. Once Djoser rebuilt the temple, the drought ceased, and annual flooding occurred once more, ending the famine. This important inscription clearly shows us that the ancient Egyptians connected Khnum with the flooding of the Nile, and clearly sought salvation through him. This event also shows a large rise in wealth and influence of both Djoser and the Temple of Khnum, to which the pharaoh dedicated a swath of land between Aswan and Tecumseh, and all of its wealth and income, as well as a share of imports from Nubia. It remains a matter of debate whether this was an occurrence during Djoser's reign, or simply a later myth that served to solidify the influence of the priests of Khnum over Elephantine Island. Historically, there is a mention of a 7-year drought and famine, but during the late Second Dynasty and the rule of Pharaoh Neferkasokar.